Dr. Bob. But now he's Reverend Dr. Bob.
Yeah.
Typically, that's only if you have a doctorate in divinity, which I do not.
Yeah, but you have a master's in divinity.
No, there are a whole bunch of folks who have the same degree that I have who are Reverend Doctor. I'm just being technical.
You're being what?
Technical, you know, it's not a doctorate in divinity.
I think you're a reverend and a doctor. Can I get a vote?
I would agree.
If somebody is a reverend and a doctor. Amen.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bob. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Mindy.
It's so exciting to be here. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Bob. If we can't call you that, I'll never say it again, but I had a lot of fun writing it today. Yeah, welcome. I have a few opening words, and then we're going to light our very own chalice, which was locked in a closet in the back, but we got the key today. So we're in business. And so, you know, the New York Times, if you're a subscriber, they give you all these free newsletters. Keep you happy. So keep subscribing. And anyway, one of them is called Well. And today, the newsletter was 3 steps to age exuberantly.
3 steps to what?
Age exuberantly. And Reverend Dr. Bob, we're just going to use it today. Just had a birthday. And turned 79.
Ah, happy birthday.
Yeah. And I don't know anybody who's aging more exuberantly. So I'm gonna tell you these 3 things they said, and you'll say if you agree. Okay, they said, okay, this is somebody Swedish. They said, embrace cart besvar. Who knows how you say that? So this Swedish phrase blends cart, meaning dear or cherished, and besvar, which means pain. So one cart besvar might be paying your bills, an annoying obligation, but you're still grateful that you have money to pay. That's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is surround yourself with the young. So this is the author's simple definition of happiness, being around young people. Not only do they supply fresh ideas and perspectives, she said, but hearing about their plans and prospects is a way to stay in tune with the young person you yourself were at some point. Number 2. Number 3, I'm always going to be glad to hear this, because everybody's always telling them the opposite. Say yes whenever possible. One of the misconceptions about older people is that they're rigid and they never change, and that's not true. Older people are not more rigid than younger people. Those are personality traits, not age traits. So those are 3 things, 3 steps to help you age exuberantly. What do you think? Bob is noted for saying yes.
Yes, in fact, they told me that I should learn to say I always got that.
You can barely even say the N word. And you certainly surround yourself with the young. And do you say thank you when you pay your bills? There you go. There you go. And if you guys need tutoring in French,
Yeah.
I will hook you up. All right, with that, we're going to light our chalice. Frank, would you like to?
I would
Have
love
you
to.
got it back to us?
Yeah.
Oh, this one we have to hold the candle.
That'll show through.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. So, I'd like this chalice to welcome everybody in. So, without further ado, I put the topic of today and the short bio for the aforementioned in the order, so you can read up. And turning it over to you, and yes, we don't require the speaker to wear masks, and we usually do it from down here.
Great. So this is the moment, right?
This is your
Right. So good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So good to see you all. Let me say first and foremost, this is the 4th Martin Luther King Day talk I've given since the beginning of the year. I've got 2 more before the end of the month, and then we go into Black History Month when I start doing it all over again. Almost everybody except Mindy introduces me as saying, and here's somebody who knew Dr. King, which is always worthwhile and a good way to sort of introduce what I'm about to say. And perhaps it's most important because today, as every Black pastor that I know has probably opened a sermon by talking about Memphis, the fact that the town that has now captured international attention. I saw a lot of coverage on French news about what's been happening in Memphis. The fact that we're talking about Dr. King and about Memphis in the same breath has often left folks without the memory of the fact that Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis as well, that Memphis has significance in a variety of different settings. For example, 3,000 years ago, Memphis was basically the Egyptian Empire. It moved over time, but the idea that this is a city that has been associated with death, the idea that it has also been associated with one of the most significant civilizations on the history of the planet is partially, I think, how people are trying to capture what do we make of this moment? What are we supposed to do with scenes of brutality that the pastor this morning said he simply could not watch, saying, I've seen enough Black trauma. Having to see it more probably is not necessary because we all know what in the end it signifies. Knowing Dr. King is one of those things that I struggle to describe to people in ways that really make sense. So bear with me for a second while I describe something about my long history with that particular part of my past as a college student at Colgate University between 1962 and 1966, as a field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1964 to 1968 when SNCC disbanded, and as someone who used to bump into Dr. King periodically, both in Atlanta as well as in Mississippi, particularly around something called the Conference of Federated Organizations, which was the coalition of civil rights movement in 1964 that helped sponsor Mississippi Freedom Summer. Now, I'm very fortunate to be in a crowd that probably recalls something of that history. But as a professor at Columbia, I often try to ask people to recall the names of the folk back then who were so much a part of our history, so much a part of the headlines that we basically dealt with whenever the civil rights movement was part of the news. Folk don't remember Stokely Carmichael. They don't remember James Foreman, Roy Ennis, Floyd McKissick. These are all folk that I knew on a first name basis. And maybe that's the way to best describe one of the most significant things about Dr. King. Dr. King was an ordinary guy. When you met him, he was 5'6" tall. What made him remarkable was not his stunning good looks, he was not a movie star, but he had presence. And there was always something about his voice that I thought was absolutely magical. He spoke even when he said something that was mundane. It was as if your ear, it was as if your eye, as if your soul was really conditioned to hear what he was about to say and to pay real attention to the way he said it. Having folks say you knew Dr. King and then say that in a way as if to have that kind of close connection made you something of a hero always makes me laugh. I knew him because in April of 1964, the YMYWCA, knowing that it was a presidential year and knowing that this was the year when the civil rights movement was going to make the transition from protest to really focusing on the vote, there was a decision made. Let's send college students into 9 cities in the South during spring break and have them engage in voter registration campaigns. The chaplain at Colgate University had met Dr. King the year before. He was inspired. More than just inspired, he was a guy who from that moment until his death really became clear about the importance of civil rights as human rights and used to preach about it frequently. There were only 2 Black students at Colgate University at that moment in my life, and I was one of them. And it was very clear, you're supposed to go down there and do this. That I wound up in Atlanta meant that I was in the offices of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. My boss for the spring break period that I was there was Andrew Young, who many of you know became the US ambassador to the UN with Jimmy Carter, and was also twice mayor of Atlanta. But back then, he was just one of the young group of preachers, always around Dr. King, and the one who used to introduce Dr. King to our group periodically when he came through, so that he could give us words of encouragement. He could say things about what we were doing, its importance, trying to underscore how much, talking to a group that was all white, with me as the exception, there was some real hope that the lessons learned in Atlanta would be a permanent part of whatever we would do as adults, once done with college, at the moment we graduated. I recall more than anything else, as you might well imagine, how much he found amusement in my last name. Name a Baptist preacher anywhere who's going to be introduced to somebody whose last name is full of love and not have him smile. I did not know Dr. King well. We were not buds. But whenever I ran into him, he always recalled something about me. Oh, you that love guy. Been in love, lot of love, sort of love. What's your name? What's your name? What's your name again? And then he would smile and pat me on the back. And he was the one who suggested that at some point in time I should seriously consider becoming a seminarian and do the work that ultimately led to the kind of leadership he thought the Black church was in a unique position to provide at that moment in our history. So I knew him. I was part of a much larger movement. And part of what I think gets lost is how much and to what degree that was his job. Dr. King was not somebody who was supposed to be separate and apart from the rest of us. He was an ordinary guy, and the whole point was, as an ordinary guy doing heroic things, we were all supposed to be like that. That you didn't want a leader who was a superhero. You didn't want somebody who looked like a movie star. You wanted somebody who looked like everybody else, but had seen the light. And as a consequence of seeing the light, knew what it meant to do the right thing at the right time when the moment called for it. I think more than anything else, it's that notion that what you see in his life is not the heroism that we talk about so much today. The fact that he is slowly but surely becoming the Protestant version of a saint, that every year as we recall his memory, his image, everything that he represents becomes more and more exalted. What I'm suggesting is he's being taken out of the realm of the ordinary and being placed in some kind of celestial armor where what we think of is not so much what he did, but who he represented, a gift to humankind. Well, he was definitely that, but I think as is undoubtedly the case with Jesus of Nazareth, if he were to look at the way in which his name, his memory is celebrated today, he would not recognize the individual that is supposedly him. I know Dr. King would recognize himself, but I think he'd be very upset that we've drifted so far away from what he saw as the central tenet of his message. I think a lot about what happened in 1966 when slowly but surely the Council of Federated Organizations in Mississippi started to slowly but surely fall apart. Nobody remembers this, but in the summer of 1966, James Meredith, another name that's been forgotten, was someone who had graduated from the University of Mississippi School of Law. His entrance to that school was the occasion of national headlines and a Supreme Court decision. He was always very clear about what was happening with the civil rights movement. And in 1966, post the 1965 law that basically made it against the law to outlaw any effort that kept Black people from the ballot box, he said, I'm going to take a march. I'm going to go from DeSoto County, the county that I worked in 1964, all the way down to Jackson, Mississippi, to make sure that people understand in the state legislature the importance of the vote. He didn't get more than 2 or 3 miles outside of the county seat before he was shot. And what we remember about that march wasn't so much that eventually all the civil rights leaders managed to be a part of it. No, it was that somewhere outside of Louisville, I think, Willie Ricks and Stokely Carmichael start to yell the phrase, Black Power. That changed the movement. That changed Dr. King's relationship to a lot of what had been driving everything that the civil rights movement was standing for. More than anything else, Black Power was also accompanied by a kind of a tentative embrace of the Black Panther Party. I am pictured in a House Un-American Activities Committee report as part of an organization chart that looks at 3 organizations: the Black Panther Party nationally, the Black Panther Party in California, And the Central Committee of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, where I happened to serve towards the end of my time in SNCC. SNCC tried to become a part of the Black Panther Party. It ended so horribly that it literally resulted in the disbanding of the organization altogether. But what Dr. King regretted wasn't so much that Black power was now something that people were arguing, yelling about, and trying to chant in the streets. It was that it deflected us away from a focus on nonviolence. I had been a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I thought it was really important that we were emphasizing nonviolence. I was a philosophy and religion major. I was really clear that there was something about Gandhi, his message, the idea that Christian love ultimately expresses itself not as war, but as something so much more profound, that we were drifting away from that message in 1968. It's something that has me thinking about where are we at this point in 2023. If Dr. King were here, part of what I know he'd be preaching about is a statistic that just became clear, at least became really emphasized. A couple of weeks ago, the leading cause of death of children in the United States is gun violence. Kids die in the United States from gun violence more than anything else, more than any bacterial infection, more than any kind of affliction that we know is a part of the health of young people. No, not only is it the leading cause of death for children, much of what has transformed that statistic is how much it is the cause of death for Black children. I keep thinking about Dr. King and his kids. What would he say? What would he do in the face of all of that? Would his voice not be the one that at this moment, when the country is struggling with issues of guns, gun control, what are we to do with gun violence? The idea that we are a nation where there are more guns than there are people, that we have such high rates of gun-related homicide is simply because guns are present. The idea that many personal grudges in the United States can now be brought to some kind of termination, some kind of conclusion, because there's always a pistol, a firearm somewhere nearby, and its use can end the argument as well as the life of the person with whom you're having the beef. No, I imagine his voice would have been strong. And not only would his voice have been strong, I know he would have emphasized how much this is not the message of someone who has been anointed by God. This is the message of someone who has children, who worries about their future, who worries about their safety, and who wants people to understand that if we are to do anything at all as human beings, what we owe our children cannot be put into words. And an ordinary man saying that with the power of his voice would want to believe would be enough to spring us into action. I love the idea that where we are at this moment is talking about faith in action. Because too much of what I think we're reading about these days is faith being something about one's spiritual power. It is something that you develop as an individual. It links you with the cosmos. It links you with whatever deity you may worship. And it is always thought to be something personal, not something that we do together, not something that we do in a setting, in a building like this. To the degree that we are talking about spirituality as the way in which we will see the future, that we will have a clearer vision of what's going on, it always seems once again to be directed at what I am going to do as an individual, not what is it that I owe those who are around me. Faith in action, it seems to me, is more than just what am I doing as an individual, it's what do I do in community. This is something I learned very much at the feet of Mindy Fullilove, the whole notion that much of what happens in our field, public health, is directed by the debt we owe, if you will, to medicine. In medicine, the patient is the unit of analysis. You're always, as a doctor, thinking about what can I learn from what you tell me about your illness that will allow me to put something together that looks like a treatment or a cure. That public health is supposed to be about the group, the population, the community, is often lost. And it's especially problematic when you look at the last 2 years that we've been struggling with COVID-19. Because I spend a lot of time in France, I'm very, very impressed with how much many of the messages about getting vaccinated, wearing a mask, being engaged in something that looked like social distancing was something that on the public service announcements always was said in the following form: do this for your kids, do this for your family, do this for your neighbors. What did we do in the United States? Well, we talked about us. Do this for yourself. Keep yourself safe. Do whatever you have to do to keep yourself from what? Dropping dead. But the idea that we owed something to those who are around us kind of got lost. It got lost because it didn't work. People didn't vibe with that. They didn't feel it. They didn't see it. So this very aggressive form of American individualism, which I think is best expressed by all the violence that we as a nation have been observing over the course of much of our lifetime, is something that were Dr. King here, he would say, this is madness. This is madness. What are we doing to ourselves as individuals? And what are we doing to ourselves as communities? And then he would say, having pointed the finger at what was going on, he'd say, what are we going to do to make sure that this gets changed? There is one place where I think I really do see the notion that there is something to be said about the appeal to the individual as a member of a community, as something larger than that individual's ego. And it happens based on something that you saw in my bio that has to do with the Barred Prison Initiative. This February 3rd, I'll be starting my 13th anniversary as somebody who's been teaching in the 6 prisons that are part of the Bard College effort. Now, I mention that only because over that 13-year period, I have seen a very significant number of folk who are my students at a point in the class where we're talking about public health, because that's what I teach, have them reflect on lives in the communities that they left. And it's at that moment you get some glimpse into what happens when someone who was in a prison because of some violent act that he or she had been involved in, and has now got an educational challenge as a way in which that individual reviews his, her, or their life and starts to say, I now understand how to attach meaning to who I was and who I want to be. Public health concentration at the Barred Prison Initiative has become very popular. It's not just because there are jobs waiting for folk when they get out in the public health sector. There's a felony-friendly environment because lots of people come home and they need the services of public health, so they have a natural place to go. No, what I see, what impresses me, what drives me, is how much they see this as an act of redemption. This is how I give back. Let me go back to the community. Let me do what I can, carrying a message of help, when at another point in my life, the message I was carrying was quite the opposite. Let me do what I can to lessen the harms that I see daily visited upon this community, and let my efforts, if it is possible, atone for whatever it is that brought me to this classroom in the first place. I'm a cynic, but I believe in redemption because I've seen it. I'll say that again. I believe in redemption because I've seen it. And I've seen it because part of that redemption is all about understanding self, but in the midst of that understanding, being clear that who I am is only given meaning by who I'm around, what community I'm a part of, what effort I undertake to make the life of those who are my family, my friends, and my neighbors a little bit better because of what I have been about. I think that that was really, more than anything else, the core of what Dr. King was always driving for. Yeah, human rights, yes, everything about civil rights, of course, but at heart, this was a man of God who was inflamed by the message that we could do better, who believed that we not only could do better, somebody had to go out in the streets and say, with me, what are we doing next? And when we're at it, can we do it better? Everything about faith and works is about, first, being reminded that there is work for us to do. The scriptures in just about every religious tradition I know about always have something about what we owe, the places that we're from, the families that gave birth to us, and the communities where we live. They always have something about the obligation that we owe them. I want to believe that the core of Dr. King's message was to point to that obligation, inspire us to really see that that obligation was alive and well, and that it demanded from us more than just our ears, more than just our belief, more than just our faith, but our actions. We are called every day in the midst of all the madness that surrounds us, which all of us mentioned in the course of coming together in this sanctuary today. We are all called to not only hear, to not only feel, but to do. And I think if Dr. King had one enduring message that will live well past almost anything that we see as the secular nature of the world that we're living in now, is that in pointing towards what we owe right now to those who are around us, it was also pointing to the future. We don't get there if we don't get there together. And there's so much that is demanded of us. The idea that this is the moment when we're reminded of it, that his birthday gives us an opportunity to sort of rethink at the beginning of the year, what will we do and how will we do it? I'm honored to be in a position to give this kind of message because doing it as a lecture to a group of graduate students, it kind of loses its edge. But I keep thinking that, geez, I wish I could send Dr. King a video of me talking about this to see whether or not, in recalling I'm that love guy, been in love, lot of love, sort of love. I also tried to do my best to convey what I thought was the most important thing about having been in his presence at a moment in my life when I needed to be told, this is you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob, you know these are chatters and appearance, so you don't have to sit down.
Oh, okay.
They probably want to say something.
Okay, very good.
And we have some people on Zoom. Hi, people on Zoom. You can say something too. You can raise your hand and turn the phone.
Okay. Wow.
And one of your biggest fans is on Zoom, Bob. See Susan?
Yes.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Bob. Hey. Well, and then you turned my whole brain around in 6 different directions. I am so grateful to have heard you.
Oh, bless your heart.
Thank you.
I owe you. I'm trying to write about all this, and she's the one who's trying to guide me through that process.
Amen.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
So the thing that comes to mind, and you mentioned Stokely Carmichael, and I recently read a speech that he had given at Vanderbilt in around that time. Yeah. And he was talking about the structure, the systematic racism that is in this country, and how Black power up to that point was an important phrase, but misunderstood in the sense that the structure needed to change before the changes could come about. And the things that you're talking about the individual and bringing love into the community and bringing love into the things that you do. I mean, these things have to happen simultaneously, don't they? I mean, the message of the Black Panthers and Black Power is as important, I think, as the message that Dr. King brought. And so I don't know that we can accomplish what you're suggesting without that change.
There are at least 3 scholars at Columbia who've written about the Black Panther Party. And they're right that maybe 1% of it was the stuff that was on TV and in the posters. The other 99% is they opened clinics, they opened schools, they did community work. A lot of what we say we're supposed to do in public health is modeled after what the Black Panthers did. There are 2 places where work that they started in the 60s still goes on. Yeah. One of them is in Seattle, Washington. So I think we were always very, very clear that they understood what it meant to be in community. But I think, especially thinking about Stokely, who you might know became Kwame Ture, having spent time in Africa and having been dramatically impacted by that. First, Stokely was a person who recruited me to stick. And so much of this is what I consider to be synchronicity, the irony of circumstances and events. I met him at Bryn Mawr College in 1963 at a conference called the Second American Revolution. I even try to write about this in the draft that I'm working on with Susan. He was a philosophy major, as was I. We debated up until 2 o'clock in the morning. And when I showed up in Ohio at the orientation for Mississippi Freedom Summer, he picked me out and said, no, he's staff. And from that moment on, I got paid to be a civil rights worker.
Wow.
$10 a week,
Wow.
which after taxes was $9.64. Trust me, that's one of those badges of honor that everybody carries around, you know. There were volunteers and then there was, wait for it, staff. And Stokely became the person who traveled the country until his death in Presbyterian Hospital, right across the street from the place where Malcolm X was assassinated, for the African Americans Revolutionary People's Party. He used to come to Berkeley when we were living there. And he regularly used to talk, and we always used to chat about what's happening. And he always was about the business of recalling 1968 as a flirtation with what they thought had to be done to change the dynamic of the long, hot summers. Remember 1964 to 1968, every summer, cities used to go up in flame. The Kerner Commission report was literally written about, the one that occurred in Newark and then later on. So he was very clear that, you know, violence was not any kind of answer, but it was also very clear that what happened in Memphis was too much a part of what he thought the struggle had to focus on. And he was never really clear, I don't think any of us are really clear, how you deal with the issue of violence from a non-violent standpoint if, there's an important if, you're a community organizer. We in SNCC did terrible, where as soon as we moved up above the Mason-Dixon line. We were very good at talking about segregation and about voting, where you couldn't do that. That was easy, people were organized, they became enthused. You could get a lot of conversations started because the fact that people wanted things to vote for was a most important way of bringing us all together. But in the North, where everybody not only got the vote, they were noted for how much they didn't vote. Getting people to organize and do something concrete, oh no, that was going to take something more than what was working for us in the South. And the thought was, if we talked about doing the things that the Panthers were doing, we'd be okay. But we didn't embrace the 99% that was the public health stuff, schools, clinics, all kinds of work in the community. No, we embraced the stuff that got headlines, and that was our destruction. I don't know that he and I ever got to a point where we agreed on that, but we were all pretty clear that if we had 1968 to do over again, maybe there would have been other steps that we would take. So yeah, I mean, I think, again, following in Mindy's footsteps, the one thing that has certainly been a great appeal to the young men and women that I taught public health to in prison was the whole idea that making community is, at least in many respects, a function of coming back to the places that might have been responsible for a bunch of events in your life that led you to prison. But the idea that there is stuff to do back there, that there's work to be done, that you, as a credible messenger, might be able to organize better than we ever could back in the 60s. That is something that I think a lot of my students believe. And because I've seen a lot of them in action, I really want to believe that that's possible. So I keep holding on to the hope, which is one of the reasons why I try to give positive messages as opposed to, oh my God, it's all over. It's literally because I keep being reminded that there's power in those messages, power in those approaches. And yeah, part of it is an awareness of the things that are difficult, but an embracing of all the things that, when they work, they really work well, for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Other comments or thoughts or reflections?
I'm the guy who, when he gives a lecture, wants people to be,
Absolutely. Well, the other thing that I just wanted to mention was we are, Mindy mentioned a couple of months back that you had offered to serve as an associate to the congregation, and we are really happy about that. And the opportunity to hear you speak and is great. So we're very much looking forward, as our little congregation starts to grow a little bit, we're very much looking forward to that. So thank you.
Thank you. And then let me say why, at this moment in particular, I'm very anxious to be a little bit more visible as the Reverend Dr. Barb. You're right, I really do want to embrace that more. For the last 2 years now, I've been involved in something called Choose Healthy Life, which is a program of the Black Church. It is associated with a couple of notables, Al Sharpton, our senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock. They're all folk who've said, based on what we've seen with COVID-19, the Black Church has to be involved in issues of community health. It's amazing to see that over the course of that 2 years, there are now 115 churches in 15 cities that are taking members of the congregation, training them as community health workers, and having them engage in everything from testing for COVID-19 to vaccinations. But here's the big thing. Also dealing directly with all of the health problems in the community that made COVID so deadly. Black communities are the ones that have the highest concentration of obesity, diabetes, and a variety of forms of cardiovascular disease that with a COVID infection proved to be fatal. Yeah. So all of a sudden the Black church, which is typically, as is the case here, an institution that serves people over the age of 60, was seeing their numbers being severely hit by what this pandemic was about. 90% of the mortality in the last year from COVID-19 has been in people over the age of 65. So what the Black church couldn't do for HIV, the second viral pandemic of our times, because of their inability to understand issues of homosexuality and the church, it has now been able to really embrace with COVID-19. And I have been giving classes on a weekly basis to 5 cities where I talk about the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, this is a movement. All of a sudden, even your pastors are saying, maybe we need to rethink the mission of the church, because how do we hold anything that allows us to be a force in the community if we're not able to keep each other healthy? So suddenly deciding that there is a ministry, a health ministry, that should involve the church, that all of a sudden I'm seeing people engaged in public health that I never ever see at the typical meetings, conferences, health fairs, or what have you that we give. It's really led me to believe that maybe we are in the midst of a moment where talking about health and talking about faith are two things that, instead of seeming to be not directly connected, now are intimately a part of how we're moving forward. So I like the idea of having a church home. I like Columbia University, but it's got real limitations, not least of which is Mindy and I could go on for a couple of years about all the limitations, but I like the idea that it's much easier for someone who's engaged in the kinds of witnessing that I think is present in a congregation like this, to have us think about what does the future entail. And in a talk where violence, which is a public health issue that we worry about a great deal, I mean, everything that I think we're potentially about is made that much more important because we're not alone. I think a lot of people are waking up to the potentials of faith communities to do things that people in science, people in medicine and public health can't do. So I'm honored to be a part of this, literally because I see it as what I hope, I'm going to use that word again, is a movement that will pick up a little bit of speed, a little bit of vigor, and with any kind of luck, lots of impact in terms of all the things that we care about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
much. We want to take a collection for the good and welfare of the church. And dear people on Zoom, any thoughts you want to share right at this point? We're so glad you're here. Zoom contingent.
No.
Yes. Is that somebody speaking?
I think there's, redemption feels pretty good. And on a level, it feels a lot better than all of the self-pursuit that people are doing and finding not satisfying. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, it feels better. And it feels better to be in a collective, in a group of people. And I think once we get out of the me generation somehow, people are going to wake up to the fact of how good it feels.
I love that thought, Susan. James
James Bradford.
said he really enjoyed it.
James Bradford is somebody that I know through the Columbia Wellness Center. And
Cool.
he and his wife are both, his wife is part of the Choose Healthy Life program.
Nice.
As well. So small world. That's how I got other churches to be engaged in what we're doing here. Thank you, James.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for supporting our congregation. And as you know, we're people who put our money where our mouths are. We believe that faith and works have to be brought together. And so we're very proud that our space is used by Lonby, by the University of Orange, by the Hub, by the community, that we've opened our doors. And
Indeed.
it's been a great honor and privilege to be living our faith out to the world. And thank you. We're so excited for the future.
Thank you, Mike. We're happy to do.
Do you actually want to join our church?
Yeah, I'm happy to do.
We have a membership program. We can bring it out next time.
Yeah.
You know, my aunt is
A member?
10,000 years ago.
Are you kidding? Oh, yeah, you told me once that you,
Yeah.
well, you could join again.
I got them.
Excellent.
I don't want anybody digging back to the 1950s. See, Dr. Bob, your name is there somewhere, I just know it.
Very excited.
Yeah. Greg would have known.
All right. I came across this very remarkable short prayer in a book called The Wisdom Jesus, which is about Jesus as a wisdom teacher. And so the thesis of the book is that as a wisdom teacher, Jesus was trying to get us to open up our minds. He wasn't. So if you think about the prodigal son, the prodigal son comes home, the dad's going to give a party, and the older son says, "Why are you giving him a party?" And he starts to fuss and complain, and he doesn't go to the party. So why is that? Why does the good son act out? He can't accept, he can't embrace, he feels cheated. And Jesus is trying to say, think about that. So it's good to think about the parables as you're supposed to think about them. They're not simple, they're contradictions. You have to figure out what's the synthesis. We're not good because we just stayed home and did the work. We're good because we have good hearts and we can understand why the dad gave the party. If we can't understand why the dad gave the party, we didn't get there yet. So anyway, I'm talking about this. She quotes this poem saying that, if we can, anyway, I'm going to read you this poem. So this poem was found beside the body of a dead child at the Ravensbrück death camp during the Holocaust. And it just seemed to me that, we're in the middle of a Holocaust of sorts. The Holocaust goes on, right? So many people die. But this is what this prayer says. Oh Lord, remember not only the men and women of goodwill, but also those of ill will. That's the paradox, right? But do not remember all the suffering they inflicted on us. That's the second paradox. Remember the fruits we have brought thanks to this suffering. Our comradeship, our loyalty, our humility, our courage, our generosity, the greatness of heart, which has grown out of all this. And when they come to judgment, let all the fruits which we have borne be their forgiveness. I thought that was a good challenge for us to take forward as we celebrate the life of Martin Luther King and try to celebrate the life of Tyre Nichols and all the other people who have left us too soon. We try to make sense of these crazy times. That out of evil grows, our hearts have to grow, right? And then those are the fruits of the challenge. Let us remember them. And we're going to have delicious, brief refreshments, light refreshments. Myrna brought some various treats. I brought some various treats. And on the porch. So if we could all adjourn to the porch. And Karen, can I give you the money?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody on Zoom. I'm sorry you can't join us for refreshments, but have refreshments at your own house, and please come again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.